Your body is in bed, but your mind is still arguing with imaginary situations. You replayed a conversation from this morning, then one from 3 years ago, then a conversation that hasn't happened yet, one that might never happen, but you've already rehearsed your response to it 7 different ways. You're not anxious, you're not sad, you're just thinking constantly, like the mind found a channel it can't switch off. And here's what nobody tells you about that. It doesn't feel like a problem, it feels like preparation. That's the part that makes overthinking so invisible, so persistent, so deeply woven into who you are. Because from the inside, it doesn't feel like suffering. It feels like being thorough, like being responsible, like being careful in a world that punishes people who aren't. But what if that's not what's actually happening? What if overthinking isn't intelligence at work, but fear wearing intelligence as a disguise? You are not broken. That needs to be said before anything else. The mind that replays conversations, that catastrophizes before breakfast, that turns a 3-word text message into a psychological case study, that mind is not malfunctioning. It is doing exactly what it was trained to do. It learned, somewhere along the way, that thinking ahead was the safest way to move through the world. That if you could just predict enough, prepare enough, analyze enough, you could prevent pain before it arrived. This is not a character flaw. This is a nervous system that learned to survive. And it was very good at its job. The first thing to understand is what the brain is actually doing when it overthinks. Researchers at Harvard University, Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert, studied over 2,200 adults and found something that should stop you mid-thought. People spend nearly 47% of their waking hours thinking about something other than what they're currently doing. Nearly half of conscious life, not present, not here. Somewhere else in a memory, a worry, a simulation of a future that may never arrive. And that wandering mind, they found, was consistently linked to lower happiness. Not because people were thinking dark thoughts necessarily, but because the mind in motion, untethered from the present, generates a kind of friction, a low hum of unease that never fully quiets. Yale researchers studying what's called the default mode network explain why. When the brain isn't focused on an external task, this network switches on automatically. It's the brain's idle state, and in that idle state, the mind does what it was always doing underneath the surface. It talks to itself. It rehearses past failures. It imagines future threats. It builds models of worst-case scenarios with architectural precision. The brain, in other words, does not rest. It just changes channels. Now add loneliness to this equation, and the volume gets turned up considerably. In 2023, U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy released a formal advisory identifying chronic loneliness as a public health crisis in America. Millions of adults reported feeling persistently disconnected not just from others, but from themselves. And what loneliness does to a thinking brain is something neuroscience has only recently begun to map. Research, led by UCLA psychologist Matthew Lieberman, found that the brain processes social rejection and loneliness through the same neural pathways as physical pain. Being alone genuinely, chronically alone, doesn't just feel emotionally difficult. It registers in the nervous system the same way a wound does. And a nervous system in pain becomes hypervigilant. It scans, it monitors, it tries to think its way to safety because safe human connection, the thing that would naturally regulate it, isn't available. The lonely brain thinks more not because it wants to, but because it doesn't have another way to feel held. Modern life has made this worse in ways that are quiet and almost invisible. Social media delivers an endless stream of other people's curated certainty, their promotions, their relationships, their answered prayers, while you sit alone at 11 p.m., blue light on your face, wondering what you're missing. Productivity culture tells you that stillness is waste, that if you're not optimizing, you're falling behind. Your nervous system absorbs all of this information and produces what the American Psychological Association has documented extensively: elevated cortisol, the stress hormone that keeps the brain scanning for threats even when none exist, hypervigilance, racing thoughts, the inability to simply stop. But here's the part nobody tells you. Overthinking isn't random. It has a shape, and that shape was formed long before adulthood. Overthinkers are often people who learned early in life that mistakes carried emotional weight, that the environment around them was unpredictable, a parent whose mood shifted without warning, a household where approval came and went, a childhood where reading the room wasn't a social skill, but a survival skill. The brain, young and adaptive, made a rational decision: think harder, predict better, and maybe this time you'll be safe before the storm arrives. That pattern didn't disappear when the environment changed. It became part of the architecture. The nervous system kept the alarm system running long after the original threat was gone, because no one ever told it that it was allowed to rest. Perfectionism lives here too. So does the fear of uncertainty, the almost physical discomfort that comes from not knowing. Overthinkers often find that ambiguity feels like danger, a vague text, an unresolved conversation, a plan that hasn't been confirmed. The mind rushes in to fill the silence with analysis, because analysis feels like control, and control feels like the closest thing to safety available. As people move through different seasons of life, this pattern doesn't disappear, it shifts. In adolescence, overthinking tends to center on belonging. Am I liked? Am I enough? In early adulthood, it migrates toward performance. Am I doing this right? Am I wasting my potential? In midlife, it often becomes existential. Is this it? Did I choose correctly? The behavior is the same, only the subject changes. Because the nervous system beneath it, the one that learned to think its way to safety, is still running the same program it's always run. And in some ways, that consistency is almost poignant. The mind has been loyal to its own protection strategy for decades. What overthinking actually does, beneath all the analysis and rehearsal, is regulate emotion. It is not, as it often appears, a sign of intelligence overreaching. It is a coping mechanism that mimics control. When the world feels uncertain, thinking creates the illusion of a map. When relationships feel unstable, rehearsing conversations creates the illusion of preparation. When the future feels threatening, imagining worst-case scenarios creates the illusion that you've already survived them. The mind uses thinking the way other people use a weighted blanket. It doesn't solve anything, but it makes the weight of uncertainty feel slightly more manageable. It gives the nervous system something to hold on to when everything else feels like open water. That is not a character flaw. That is a human being doing the most human thing possible, trying to feel safe in a world that doesn't guarantee it. Some people don't rest at night. They just overthink with their eyes closed. And if that sentence landed somewhere in your chest, it's because you already knew it was true. You've felt the exhaustion that comes not from doing, but from thinking. The particular tiredness of a mind that never fully powers down. The strange loneliness of lying next to someone or sitting in a room full of people and still being somewhere else entirely inside a thought, inside a worry, inside a version of the future that your nervous system is convinced it needs to rehearse one more time. This is what it means to live inside an overthinking mind. Not dramatic, not broken, just relentless. Quietly, privately, persistently, relentless. Your brain is not trying to ruin your life. It is trying to protect you using fear as its only tool, using prediction as its only map, using thought as its only shelter. The problem is that it never quite learned when to stop. It never received the signal that the danger had passed, that the environment had changed, that you made it through. Overthinking is what happens when the mind confuses preparation with safety, when thinking more feels like doing something, even when nothing changes. When the nervous system, trained by experience, keeps scanning for threats in rooms that are finally, genuinely quiet, you are not too sensitive. You are not too anxious. You are not thinking too much because something is wrong with you. You are thinking this much because something, somewhere, at some point, made it feel necessary. And your mind, loyal and adaptive and deeply human, listened. Some people aren't exhausted because life is hard. They're exhausted because their mind never lets them fully leave survival mode. And maybe the most honest, most quietly relieving thing that can be said is this: now you know why. Not to fix it, not to fight it, just to finally understand the mind you've been living inside, the one that was always, in its own exhausted way, trying to keep you safe.